We're very honored. We are very honored to introduce Dr. David Orme-Johnson. Hold on. Hello, can you hear me better with this one?
Gotta turn it on. Here. Try it now.
Okay. We're very honored to introduce Dr. David Orme-Johnson, who is one of the premier researchers on meditation in general, or the transcendental meditation technique. So he is prolific and has published 100 scientific papers in the field, and he was the first researcher to provide scientific evidence that meditation of any kind could alter how we react physiologically to stress. He was the first to do research on meditation in prisons, showing that TM increases autonomic stability. And he was the first to show that the EEG signature of the Transcendental Meditation technique, which is alpha-1 coherence, was correlated with creativity, intelligence, and higher states of consciousness. Dr. Orme-Johnson is one of the principal researchers on the Maharishi effect, the phenomenon of decreased stress and improved quality of life in the larger society through the practice of the TM and TM City programs. He's published 23 research and review papers in this field. And he's the co-author on the first published paper on the Maharishi effect, which showed that when a threshold of 1% of the population of a city learned the TM technique, that crime rate decreased that year in subsequent years. He was also the first to show that group practice of the TM and TM City program can reduce war, terrorism regionally and worldwide, being the lead author on papers published in the prestigious Journal of Conflict Resolution. And that publication that he did was the basis of my dissertation at Harvard. And it was a very profound study and path-breaking study. Dr. Orme-Johnson was the first to conduct an fMRI neuroimaging study on TM, showing that it reduces how the brain responds to pain. He has directed numerous major field studies, including 2 healthcare utilization studies involving 2,600 participants. And he was a consultant for 4 years on the NIMH grant to study stress reduction and hypertension in African-American adults. In 1995, the National Institutes of Health Office of Alternative Medicine selected Dr. Orme-Johnson to review the research on the effects of meditation on chronic pain and insomnia for an NIH Technology Assessment Conference. Again, in July of 2008, he was invited by the NIH National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine to give an overview of the research on the TM technique at a conference on meditation for health purposes held in Bethesda, Maryland. In 2011, he was invited to be a key informant for systematic review of the research on meditation sponsored by the NIH Agency for Health Research and Quality, conducted at Johns Hopkins. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And as I think I mentioned in the notice that I sent around about this evening's class, he's traveled to 56 different countries to present on this topic. Dr. Orme-Johnson, it's so great to have you.
Thank you, Carla, Dr. Carla Brown. It's great to be here and talk to you bright Loyola students. And I'm going to try to convince you that regular practice of TM is a really powerful tool for going through medical school, but for going through life in general. So let me just share my screen and get to my slides. And I pick this one. I say share. Can you see my screen? Carla?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes,
my
I
talk,
can see your screen.
okay. So my talk is how the Transcendental Meditation technique enhances the body's natural self-healing processes. And this is to you, Stritch School of Medicine. And this is today, and this is me. And the overview of what I'm going to say has 4 points. The first is that the effects of TM will be on the effects of TM on increasing brain integration and cognitive abilities. Certainly something that a medical student could use. Secondly, the effect of TM I will review on reducing stress, risk factors, and improving health. And then research indicating the importance of regular TM practice. I'll be showing you studies that compare regular versus irregular practitioners, and it definitely has a much more powerful effect if you practice it regularly. And then I'll end with the most recent research paper, which came out about 2 weeks ago, on which I was a co-author, Dr. Ken Kavanaugh, Michael Dilbeck, and myself. And Carla mentioned the studies on collective consciousness. So this is the latest one in that series. We've done about over 50 studies. It's entitled Evaluating Field Theories of a Field Theory of Consciousness and Social Change, Group Practice of Transcendental Meditation and Homicide Trends. So here we go. The overview of research on TM is that there's been a lot of it. This picture is showing 8 volumes of scientific research on the TM and TM City program, which collects 650 studies conducted in over 300 universities and research institutions in 30 countries, published in over 219 peer-reviewed journals and books. I say over because this is out of date already. And let me go back to that. Whoop, not that far back. At the bottom here, you see a link. And if you're interested in the future, finding out about TM and different papers, here is a link to researchtm.net, very simple URL. And at that website, you can search the papers by authors, by topic, by year, various ways. So if you want to know what's been done on hypertension, you can put that in and you can find out everything that's been done on it. So the first thing to know about meditation in general is that there are many different types of meditation, and people do different things during the meditation, and it has different effects on the physiology. So this chart is showing 3 major classes of meditation: focused attention, open monitoring, and automatic self-transcending, which is where TM fits in. During focused attention, one voluntarily focuses attention on a chosen object. You know, famously, a person stares at their navel or a dot on the wall, or maybe their breath or something. And some examples are Zen and Qigong and compassion meditation, Vipassana. Open monitoring, the second classification, is a non-reactive monitoring of the content of experience from moment to moment. And famously, mindfulness is the main practice that's using open monitoring. And in mindfulness, typically the person will be instructed to just simply pay attention to their stream of thoughts or stream of experiences. Sometimes it's practice eyes open, and notice what's going on. Just notice and try not to get upset about it or to be non-reactive. The idea is to kind of distance yourself from your emotions towards it. It's kind of like psychotherapy when the person relates their experiences to the therapist, and the therapist says, yes, you're remembering that experience, but that's not you. That's just some experience. You don't have to react to it. So that's open monitoring. And it's associated with a fairly slow EEG called theta, which is 4 to 8 cycles per second. And theta is associated with inhibition of sensory input at the level of the thalamus. So, for example, an example of open monitoring is if you're putting attention inward, doing mental arithmetic. If you ask someone to do mental arithmetic, then you'll see the theta come up. And what's happening is when you're trying to pay attention to something going on the inside, then you want to quiet down or dampen down the input from the outside. Back to focused attention, I didn't mention that the EEG signature for that is quite different from open monitoring. It's a very high frequency EEG called gamma, high frequency for EEG, 20 to 50 hertz, and it's looks like that on the scale of 1 second from each of these pictures of EEG is showing 1 second of data. And gamma and high frequency EEG has been known since the 1930s. One of the first things that was discovered about EEG is that when a person is focusing their attention on something, the EEG frequency is much faster. The functionality of that seems to be that the high frequency EEGs indicates the binding of cortical areas that are close together. And it kind of makes sense. If you're focusing, then you want the areas that are close together to each other to be working together very precisely. Okay, the third category, automatic self-transcending, is TM, and one transcends the steps of meditation practice leading to pure consciousness. So during TM, you do start with a very light focus on your mantra, as some of you already know and others will learn, but you don't try to hold it in mind as you would if you were doing focused attention. You don't try to not let it go away. You start your process and then you let it go. And then you have your instructions. If you find yourself you're off of it, you just easily come back to it. So the EEG signature associated with TM is alpha 1. It's about 8 to 10 hertz. And the functionality of alpha 1 seems to be that it's binding distal areas in the cortex. So whenever we do something, the brain, it has these different modules that do different things, and it sets up an integration of the different parts of the brain. And so alpha 1 coherence seems to be facilitating this large, long-range coherence and communication between different parts of the brain. And phenomenologically, it's associated with the screen of awareness. You know, we have thoughts, but then there's just sort of this basic awareness. And when you go to sleep, you get a completely different EEG from this associated with sleep. So alpha 1 is associated with just basic, you're aware on the inside, which is we call pure consciousness or transcendental consciousness in its pure state. But you're not doing anything in particular. With open monitoring, you're doing something in particular. You're focusing on inner thought processes or inner processes like breathing. And gamma, you're usually focusing on something on the outside, although you could be focusing on something on the inside. So that's the difference between the three different major kinds of meditation. But the main takeaway is that when you're studying meditation, talking about meditation, it's important to know what they're doing. All meditation techniques are not the same. You do different things, and it has different effects on the physiology. So we're going to be talking about TM. And the first thing is that we're going to talk about TM on increasing brain integration and cognitive ability. If you look at the EEG of TM, this is the alpha wave, and these again are these 8 to 10 hertz. What you see in this example, I'm pointing with my pen here in my office and you're not seeing it. What you're seeing here is these periods where the ups and downs, the peaks and troughs of these waves are very lined up with each other. And that's synchronous. And that's one of the first things that was discovered that was unusual about the research on TM is that the alpha wave becomes much more synchronous and coherent. Coherence is a way of directly quantitatively measuring the degree that the waves are moving together. So this is the coherence patterns is one way that different meditation techniques differ from each other. What you find with mindfulness meditation is you get coherence in the frontal areas of the brain and in alpha 2, which is about 10 to 12 hertz. And the coherence what we're looking at here are little icons of looking at the top of the head. This is a nose at the top and the ears on this side. And these little dots represent the different EEG placements. And so the lines connecting the dots means that there's coherence between those particular areas during, in this case, mindfulness. And so what you see is that during mindfulness practice in the frontal areas of the brain, you have the theta coherence increasing and the alpha 2 coherence. Transcendental meditation shown below, there it is a different pattern. It's a different frequency. First of all, it's alpha 1, which we showed before, but also it's across the entire head. The entire cerebral cortex becomes coherent at alpha 1. So what's the value of that? Very interesting that you can distinguish the EEG of different kinds of meditation, but what's the functionality of it? Well, it's been found through a number of studies that EEG coherence in the alpha 1 frequency range is associated with a wide range of cognitive and affective factors. For example, starting on the left of the screen, it's correlated with more frequent experiences of transcendental consciousness with greater self-awareness, increased inner orientation, which means having a more consciousness philosophical view that consciousness is something more fundamental. It's not just, the world is not just materialistic, which is interesting that you can predict someone's philosophical orientation by how coherent their brains are. Also, it's associated with neurological efficiency and increased moral reasoning, increased creativity, increased intelligence, improved concept learning, improved grade point average, increased emotional stability, decreased trait anxiety, decreased state anxiety, and decreased neuroticism. So it's actually an indication that the whole mind body is much more integrated. And so randomized control trials, I'm just showing you one here, which was done on over 300 high school students, secondary school students, giving a broad range of measurements. And in these 3 different studies, TM was compared in one with just resting with eyes closed, taking a nap, with another one with practicing another meditation technique, which was contemplation of the meaning of the Tao. It was a study done in Taiwan. And anyway, what the results are showing is that on these different measures, creativity, practical intelligence, field independence, mental efficiency, fluid intelligence, that TM is has significantly greater effect size than these other comparison groups. Effect size is in standard deviations, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details on these studies because there's quite a few to go through, and but we can talk about it more if you have questions, and we will make the papers, or Carla and Duncan will make the papers available for you on your website. So, but the main thing is that TM just produces this silence, this sort of quiet silence. And as Einstein said, I think 90 times and find nothing. I stop thinking, swim in silence, and the truth comes to me. So this is basically giving everybody a tool to get into that silence, where your thoughts and your experiences are more integrated into greater wholenesses. And that's where you have these epiphanies. It comes from that inner silence. So now let's look at the effects of TM on reducing stress, risk factors, and improving health. We all know that stress raises the metabolic rate, and transcendental meditation lowers the metabolic rate. The effects of TM are the opposite of those of stress. And as Carla mentioned, I was one of the first to study this. This was a study published in 1973, and I was measuring spontaneous skin resistance responses. The skin resistance reaction basically means sweating of the palms of the hands. And so if a person is threatened and feeling stressed, the body begins to sweat, the palms begin to sweat. It's the cooling system of the body is turning on in anticipation that you're going to be running away, fighting or flight, either fight or flight. And so that's where this comes from. But it turns out if you have just people sitting quietly in a room and nothing's happening sitting with their eyes closed, that some people show more of these little stress responses, and you can measure them and quantify, how many they made over a certain amplitude. And so this just illustrates with these lines here on the left side of this chart, conceptually the difference between the meditators and the non-meditators. I found that the meditators were made much fewer of these responses. And when you counted them, what you see over here is a number of responses in a 10-minute period. And the meditators showed much lower levels, many fewer of these responses before TM, and then during TM, they decreased even more, and then it came back up afterwards, compared with the control group, which had a lot more. So this has been studied many times and since 1973 with randomized controlled trials and so forth. But this is basically the finding. When you learn to meditate, it reduces your internal stresses, and over time, you're carrying around much less stress with you. So one of the advantages of that, shown in the next slide, is that it changes how you interact with the environment. In this part of the study, I was blasting people in the ears with a loud tone, was 3,000 hertz, 100 decibels for about half a second. And we're measuring here the amplitude of their stress response. This is like the startle response. So something comes on, loud tone, someone claps their hand behind your head or something like that. You'll respond. You'll show this rise of the skin resistance response. But with repeated repetitions, what I found is that the meditators habituated much faster. If anything, they responded more in the beginning. They were very sensitive to the noise, but then there was no functionality to it. It didn't mean anything really, and so they stopped responding. The control group looked very similar to begin with, but then they continued responding again. And I think that's the interaction of their internal stresses with what's happening in the environment. We all know that if we're having a stressful day, we have a much more difficult time dealing with something new that comes up. So that's what's happening here. And when I looked at the waveform of the response of the TMers versus the controls, it was much simpler like this. And the control group showed many more of these secondary responses. So it's sort of more wobbly. And we know from our own experience, when we're feeling stressed and something happens, or we're feeling tired, then something happens and we keep grinding on it. It's like reverberates over and over again. So if you reduce your internal stresses, then it's going to change how you react to the environment. You're going to react more efficiently, not lose so much adaptive energy spinning your wheels. Another kind of study that showed change in reactivity was that TM improves stress reactivity in the central nervous system. And this is a study done with functional magnetic resonance imaging. And this is just part of the study, which shows some typical subjects, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different subjects. It shows the reaction to experimental induced pain. They put their finger into hot water for a certain amount of time. And these are different images from the fMRI. And so these people were people who were interested in learning TM, and then remeasured 5 months later. And then I had the control comparison group, which were long-term meditators, and measured them 5 months later. The long-term meditators looked like the meditators in the post-test. But what I'm showing here is this dramatic change in how the brain reacted to pain. It's the same pain, same person, same brain, but in the thalamus, which is the sensory area, in the prefrontal cortex, and in the anterior cingulate gyrus, which is in the limbic structure of the brain, which is interpreting the emotional reaction. And all of those different levels, TM reduced the reactivity to pain. So people were experiencing it, certainly, but they weren't bothered by it as much. And so again, that sort of indicates, like the previous study, that if you reduce your own internal stresses, then when stresses come to you, you're not going to react to them as much. And this is showing very dramatically that that's true in the central nervous system, as well as in the autonomic nervous system, which I showed previously. And so this is just looking at all these different stress indicators: plasma lactate, respiratory rate, skin conductance, cortisol, as you probably know, is a major stress hormone. Again, we're looking at the effect sizes here. And this is looking at changes during TM compared to changes during sitting, resting with eyes closed. So if you saw two guys or women sitting on a bench and one was meditating, one was practicing TM, all you would see is that they were both sitting there with their eyes closed. But if you measure their physiology, you would find that the ones doing TM are getting a greater depth of rest, reduced plasma lactate compared to the controls. Meditators in the blue, controls are in the red. Reduced respiratory rate, reduced skin conductance, and decreased cortisol levels. And over time, that becomes a trait. This study is showing, or this part of the study is showing baseline levels. What is the heart rate and these other measures in meditators versus controls outside of meditation? They're sitting there with their eyes closed. They're not meditating. And so what was found was that the baseline levels of these different parameters, heart rate, spontaneous skin resistance responses, plasma lactate, respiratory rate, are all significantly lower in the TM group compared with the control group. That means that they have more rested baseline. So that means that you're going through life more chilled, more relaxed. And then when something happens, then you have the energy there to mobilize quickly and deal with whatever you have to deal with. So it means that you're not, the regular meditation, you're more efficient. Physiology becomes more efficient. It's not wasting time on stress responses when they're not needed. But the adaptive energy is there for you when it is needed. And okay, so this is looking at meta-analysis on the effects of TM on psychological peace or decreased anxiety. This was a study of 146, a meta-analysis of 146 studies, and it's comparing TM with a wide range of other meditation and relaxation techniques. So placebo, that's, all know what a placebo is. People are told, given some procedure and said, okay, this is going to be good for you. And it is. It has an effect size of about 0.4. And other relaxation techniques, the relaxation response, other meditations, progressive relaxation, EEG, biofeedback, mantra meditation, and concentration. All of these didn't really do any better than a placebo. This is not to say that they don't do anything, it used to be in medical research, placebo was considered to be a big problem. But now medicine realizes that you need to tell people that they're going to get better, encourage them, create as much placebo as you can, which just means that the mind has a very powerful effect on the physiology and on the body. So you want to encourage them. But TM does something in addition to that, very powerfully, has twice the effect. And that's that deep physiological rest, which allows the body to heal itself. And so this is just another meta-analysis. This was comparing TM with mindfulness and other meditation techniques. It was on 30 studies, 1,896 subjects, and the TM group showed significantly greater reduction in trait anxiety than mindfulness studies and other meditation techniques. I put a red dotted line here at 0.8. There's a convention for saying that on effect, using this measure of standard deviations, of 0.8 is a large effect. So TM had a large effect, and that was true of the previous research too. And mindfulness and other meditations had a moderate effect. And so, but TM doesn't just reduce stress. This was another part of that meta-analysis, which is 18 studies on 772 subjects. And TM had a greater effect on increasing self-realization. So that's important. It's not just for stress reduction. It's for enlightenment. And that's a big topic, and there's a lot of amazing research on that, but some other time. So now, some of the practical applications have been with PTSD. So there have been 7 studies looking at the effects of TM on PTSD. And again, I have my dotted line here showing a large effect. On average, the effect size of these studies was about 1. And quite consistently, they all had very strong, large effect sizes. And this is compared with mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is the most widely practiced and researched and standardized of the mindfulness techniques. And what was found with the studies on mindfulness is that they had, on average, about half the effect size of TM, which was very consistent with the effects on anxiety. And just a couple of risk factors. TM has been found to reduce alcohol abuse in a meta-analysis of 97 studies, more than peer influence, relaxation techniques, driving under the influence programs or preventative education programs. Similarly on drug abuse. And so how does TM technique enhance the body's natural self-healing processes? And the principle is that the unique combination of deep rest along with the coherent brain physiology allows the intrinsic self-healing mechanisms of the body to detect and normalize imbalances in the body beyond what is accomplished by sleep and dreaming. So here's something that you will be studying. Homeostatic regulatory systems. Health can just be understood as the body's regulatory systems working properly so that everything stays in balance. Health is balance. And the stress response, all of these are things getting out of balance. So the body has this incredible intelligence built in to heal itself. And how do we heal it? How does it heal itself? It's during sleep and dreaming primarily. But if you add TM to the mix, it has even more healing effects. It allows TM as a time in which you're in this restful alert state, and it's a very efficient time that the body can heal itself, and you're adding that to the usual sleep and dreaming. So this is a study on health insurance statistics, which showed fewer hospital admissions in the TM meditators in all categories of disease. So what we see here is the TM technique in blue, other groups. Other groups is the normative data from Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is the average of their 600,000 clients. And the TM group was 2,000 here, but we're looking at rates, hospital admissions per 1,000. And on every category, intestinal, nose, throat, lungs, heart disease was 97% lower. Genital and urinary injuries, tumors, bone and muscles, ill-defined conditions, all mental conditions, diseases of the nervous system, diseases of the metabolism, infectious diseases, diseases of skin, blood disorders, congenital and others. Across the board, TM, the meditator group, is having less hospitalization than the controls. And the same is true for outpatient visits, and medical costs are quite parallel to the admissions, the statistics. So all 3 groups had sleep and dreaming. TM group also had TM, and it shows there's more healing taking place. And for one example, let's look at increased immunity, which is a big interest now. And for the category of nose, throat, and lungs here, the TM group was 73% lower. This category includes many diseases caused by viruses and bacteria, such as common colds, sinusitis, sore throat, pneumonia, and bronchitis. So very effective. Meditating, allowing your body to rest, get extra rest, helps prevent getting those things. The other category down here that we might look at is infectious diseases, circled in red on the chart. The TM group was 30.4% lower hospitalization rate. This category includes viral infections such as polio, chickenpox, herpes, measles, and hepatitis. So help the body heal itself, meditate regularly. Now let's look at the importance, and I just said it, of research indicating the importance of regular TM practice. So the recommendation is TM twice a day, 20 minutes twice a day, before breakfast, before dinner is ideal. And the science behind why meditating twice a day is better than meditating once a day is, I'm going to show you some research on that. So conceptually, what happens during TM is this guy meditator, he says his eyes are open and the brain waves are not coherent. And he practices TM and you get the synchronous brain waves. With repeated practice and regular practice, even with eyes open, you have these more coherent brain waves, and that's been studied and measured. And that has the advantage that it's associated with all those cognitive benefits. So here, for example, is a study. It was over a 5-year study on heart patients, randomized, controlled, and TM was compared with health education. And in that study, and the outcome measure, was heart attacks, strokes, and death. So those are pretty hard measures. And what was found is that the regular meditators had a 66% reduction in heart attacks, strokes, and death compared to the controls, and the irregular ones only a 48% reduction. Another study looked at increased intelligence and decreased neuroticism through regular TM practice. So on the study on the measure of intelligence, we're comparing those who meditated more than half the time compared with those who meditated less than half the time. There's a statistically significant difference that those who meditated more than half the time increased on intelligence more than the ones who didn't. And on somatic neurotic instability, those who meditated over half the time showed a much greater reduction in somatic neurotic instability than those who meditated more irregularly. It's very interesting that the difference between those who are regular and irregular is greatest for this emotional measure. And I've seen this in a lot of the different research that TM has an effect on the entire psychophysiology, on the mind, on the body, but it has a more powerful effect on the emotions. And often people, the first thing they notice is that they feel kind of more at ease, more centered, and less worried about things. And they get more intelligent over time. Okay, and this is another study with school children, a measure of resilience, and those who meditated once a day had a 25% increase in this measure of resilience compared with 50%, twice the effect with those who meditated twice a day. And here is a study on alcoholics who were in rehabilitation. And what we're seeing here is their return to drinking patterns after they're released compared with controls who didn't meditate. So twice a day TM reduced drinking and eliminates heavy drinking in patients being treated for alcohol disorder after they go home. So after they go home, 25% of the meditators group who learned TM and were doing it twice a day during the program, only 25% returned to drinking at all. And 59% of the comparison group just went right back to drinking. And looking at the heavy drinking post-discharge, none of the ones who were meditating went back to heavy drinking compared to almost half of those who were not meditating. And this is one of the things TM does is you become more sensitive to what things are doing to your body, and so you're not less likely to continue with them. You perceive that alcohol maybe is having adverse effects rather than positive effect. And just one last slide on this: the Healer program now. A study has been done. Recently published last year. These were workers for COVID in two urban hospitals in the Boston area. And the doctors who practiced TM showed significant reductions compared with controls on emotional exhaustion, depression, anxiety, stress, and sleep disorders. So TM is a valuable evidence-based tool for stress reduction and clarity of mind, and for developing enlightened positions for an enlightened world. Now I want to go to the last part of my talk, which is on the most recent research, which is on collective consciousness. So you probably have all noticed that, and I certainly noticed when I learned TM, that meditating together, it seems to be more effective, more harmonious or something. And, we're influenced by the environment. And if the environment around us is also settling in to a quiet level, then it has a more powerful effect. And there's this idea of collective consciousness, and there's many examples of it throughout the history of social sciences and even in physics. The idea that we're all connected through collective consciousness. In this example, this is Emile Durkheim, who's considered one of the fathers of modern sociology. And he said, conscience collective is the mind of society created when consciousness of individuals, instead of remaining isolated, become grouped and combined. So there's this idea that in addition to our individual minds, there are levels of grouped minds. And for example, there's individual consciousness in the center here. And then there's a family consciousness. Our family has a certain feeling to it, a certain bond. It's like an entity to itself. And we're always interacting with that. And then at a higher level of social organization, cities have their own consciousness. You go to New York, it's a different feeling than San Francisco. You can feel it. And, different homes, going back to family consciousness. I remember as a kid going into some of my friends' house, and I was sort of astonished how different it felt, and how, it just felt completely different, very palpable. And that influences us. Whatever collective consciousness we're in, we contribute to it, the qualities of our life, but we're also being influenced by it. And then there's also the consciousness of a state and regional consciousness. Each country has its own collective consciousness, and there's world consciousness. And even more broadly, there are ages. There's the Renaissance versus the Middle Ages. Well, if you look at the literature, the art of the Renaissance versus the Middle Ages, you would never mix them up. They're completely different. There's a completely different mindset. People talk about the spirit of the age, and we're all influenced by that. You're a Renaissance person, you can't think like they did in the Middle Ages. In the 20th century, and what we're living in now, those are all very interesting, but we don't think like that anymore. And it's a different consciousness. So the point is that there are all these levels of collective consciousness, and we're interacting with them. We contribute to everything. Whatever we do, the quality of our life, it's influencing everything from our family all the way out to the whole world. we're a small part of it, but we are some fraction of it. So each of these levels is like the effect of the collectiveness, and that collectiveness is influencing us. Not only the bad news, that's what's happening with wars and famine or whatever's happening around the world, and the things that we might see on the internet, or the good news of inspiring things. But also the idea here is that we're directly connected on the level of consciousness, that we influence each other, not only through the channels of perception and the media and so forth, but directly, just on a direct level. So that brings us to this study. Just trying to kind of introduce it, get the idea. We've done a number of studies and where we've calculated that if you had the square root of 1% of a population practicing TM and the events and some advanced variants of it called the TM City program together in a group, that will be sufficient to change the trends of time in that entire population. So what we're seeing here is the monthly data from 2002 going up to 2016, and we're looking at the number of people who are practicing TM together in Iowa at our university, where we all get every day in the morning and afternoon. It's set up that everybody meditates together and then go off about their day. But so there were about 600 or so in 2002 meditating together, and then it dropped down here due to a grant that was received that paid people a stipend to actually have meditation as a job, to be there. The number of people in the group increased to this dotted line, which was the square root of 1% of the population of the US, which was 1,725 people at that time. So this is the size of the group during that experimental period. And then the funding was lost and the size of the group began to dwindle, and then it dwindled very quickly and dropped off. So what we're interested in here is, in this case, is the effects on homicides in the United States. Our prediction is that during the experimental period, homicide rates for the United States as a whole will decrease compared to the baseline. And during the post-experimental period, when the size of the group decreases, homicide rates will go up again. So this is what actually happened. These are homicides. This is monthly data. You can see it's very, throughout the year, the rate of homicides fluctuates, and it's quite systematic. There are more homicides in the summer, in July, August, and in the winter, January, February, homicides decrease. So that's what these fluctuations are about. And the time series analysis that we do removes those seasonal effects, because what we want to look at is there a change in the underlying trend? So the dotted line shows that the underlying trend in the baseline it was slightly increasing. Homicides were slightly increasing, not much. During the experimental period, there was a decrease, a very statistically significant decrease. And then when the numbers begin to drop, dropping of the homicide rate trend sort of leveled out. It wasn't decreasing very much. And then when numbers dropped quickly, the homicide turned around again. So this is showing the two together. You see the numbers dropping here, the homicide rates going up slightly, the numbers are high, and it's a threshold effect. The homicide rate doesn't start changing until this threshold is reached, and then it starts decreasing. And then when the numbers start dropping off, it stops decreasing as fast. At this period, starting about 2013, when the size of the group very quickly drops, that's when the homicide rate turns around and starts going up quickly again. And here we're looking at the trends. This is during the baseline period. That slightly increasing trend is what you see here in this line. And then here you have a decreasing trend, which is this one dropping. And then it just levels off, 2012, 2014. And then when the group drops quickly, then the trend of homicides goes up again. You see that homicide levels by the end, even though they were going up, they're basically come back to what they were during the baseline level. So that's it. So, it's pretty unbelievable. People meditating with their eyes closed, minding their own business, and that the homicide rate in an entire country would change. So what kind of factors are known to influence homicides? One is economic factors, unemployment. During unemployment, homicide and other kinds of violent crimes and crimes in general increase. But this, during our experimental period, was a time of high unemployment. And people were predicting that crime would increase, but the opposite happened. Another thing that predicts crime is rates of incarceration. Put more people in jail and you have less crime. And that's true. But during the experimental period was a time when there were fewer people in jail. You would expect more crime, and yet it was decreasing. And another thing that can affect homicides, crime, is changes in policing, changes in policy, changes in their technology. But that didn't happen, at that particular time. And certainly there were no policing changes happening nationwide. Another thing that influences violent crime are the youth aged 18 to 25. But that demographic changes very slowly. And we saw an abrupt change right at the predicted threshold, and then the predicted reversal of the effect when the independent variable was decreased, when the size of the group was decreased again. Temperature changes, can affect crime. Well, we saw that it was homicides are higher in summer and lower in winter, but that was something going on in all of the years, and these trend changes were beyond that. And seasonal cycles or pre-existing trends, the time series analysis took that into account. Was very sophisticated statistical analysis that did not violate any statistical assumptions, but you don't really need statistics anyway to see the effect. It was so clear. So reasons supporting a causal interpretation of evidence for the Marshy effect, taking as a whole, the published empirical studies on the Marshy effect display the following characteristics supporting a causal interpretation. First, there's a dose effect, which in medicine, actually the term is from medicine. Larger effects are associated with the larger size of the TM and TM city group. You change the size of the group and you change the effect. So that's a very strong indication of causality. Replication, did we just get lucky? Well, there's been 24 empirical peer-reviewed papers, many including multiple separate studies. And then the temporal relationship, lead-lag relationship. Studies have shown that you don't get the crime changing and then the number of meditators, increasing. You see they're either simultaneous or there's a lead-lag relationship. You increase the meditators, and that's followed by the changes in the social indicators. And these studies have been predicted in advance or lodged in advance with public, with review boards, independent review boards, where we told them when we were going to do the study, where we were going to do the study, and what we were measuring. And they monitored the process as it was going on. Came and they, in the study we did in Washington, D.C., they came and they actually came to see, were you really there meditating? Yeah, we were. And some of the police were using statistics on violent crime in that study, and the police were on the review board and actually co-authors on the paper. So, they knew what we were predicting and saw that we did it. And the hypothesis is based on a theoretical framework, which is that we're all connected, and that framework is being developed. There's many, many people now talking about collective effects And the TM research really is the leader in that effort. So what we're doing worldwide is encouraging collective TM practice to make the world better. And I'm just going to show you some kids around the world who are in schools where they practice TM together for the purpose of their own clarity and, you know, increasing their skills in school, but for the purpose of creating coherence and collective consciousness. So here's some adolescents in India. Here's some children in Bali, some children practicing TM in Kenya. So the hope is that we can create world peace, and that's really the bigger purpose of what we're doing. But just to say that you're meditating, you know, to reduce your stress, increasing your clarity as a medical student, but there's evidence showing, and I think it's very real, that you're doing something for the world, you know, for your family and for the nation and for the whole world. So now I'm going to stop sharing. And I hope that wasn't too long. Am I back?
There's a danger with pushing these buttons.
Oh, yes, yes, there is.
So if it all goes dark, you'll know why. David, we're trying to lower the blinds, so things may get dark on this end.
Okay. Thank you.
So David, one of you.
Clear?
Not working. Is it working? Anyway,
Whoa,
one of your slides showed better tolerance of pain when you meditate.
Right,
I just want
right.
to tell a personal story. 12 years ago, I had prostate surgery for cancer, and I had a midline incision. Post-op, I took absolutely no pain meds. All I did was meditate. And the nurses at Northwestern were trying to force me to take pain meds. I felt the pain, like you said, but I tolerated it. It just was easy to tolerate. And at that point, I'd been meditating a number of years, obviously. Just wanted to put that out there. It verified one of your slides.
I have a similar story. I had a surgery for hernial, you know, the hernia surgery, and anyway, I had to stay overnight in the hospital anyway, and they had me on a drip, of some kind of narcotic, and so I just turned it off, and because I felt that same kind of glow without it, you know, I felt the pain, but it wasn't bothering me.
Yeah.
And the doctor came in the morning and said, "Oh, don't deny yourself, you know, take the drugs. You get to." No, thank you.
I think that goes along with that alcohol reduction, that alcoholism reduction.
Yeah.
My contention is that when you meditate, you feel so good or get a purer high than you ever can get from intoxicants.
Well, that's right. The camera, can you broaden the camera? I'm seeing one guy's plate here. It's focused in. You had a wide angle, and then you went to this other thing. I'd appreciate
David,
seeing that.
we've attempted to control the camera in the past, and the results have never been good.
Well, but
The last time we had the camera on, the students finally said, "Duncan, turn it off."
It seems to be randomly moving around, but right now it's focusing in on one small thing. Earlier, it was focusing in on the back of a chair. I'd like to see
We hit our self view on Zoom, so you're the only one who can see the camera moving around.
You can't
But,
focus it. You can't go
Does
broad.
anybody have another question for Dr. Orme-Johnson?
I'm getting no
So,
satisfaction. here.
I know a couple people mentioned here, the effects, the positive effects they've had with energy. I'm someone who feels like I'm constantly sleep deprived. And so my
Yeah.
question for you is, I guess, let's say you had an hour of time for your day,
Yeah.
extra time. Would you say that practicing TM would produce a similar or better state of rest than if you were to use that hour to nap?
Well, I'll tell you what will happen. What happens during TM depends on the state of your physiology when you start. So you can start your TM, but you'll fall asleep when you start settling down. So you'll go to sleep. But I would say in that situation, start your TM. But if you feel sleep coming on, don't try to fight it. Don't feel, oh, I have to stay awake, I'm not meditating right. Falling asleep, whatever happens during meditation, it's the body is normalizing itself. So if it's sleep deprived, the first thing it's the body's first priority is to get some sleep. It has a different kind of a deep sleep, and sleep has a different function than TM. TM doesn't replace sleep. It's different.
Anybody else?
Hope that was.
Anybody have a question on that dose-dependent relationship between meditating regularly and those who don't meditate regularly? Any questions on that? David, how many studies are there out there showing that dose-dependent relationship between meditating regularly versus meditating less regularly? You showed us like 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah, more than a dozen. I haven't systematically collected them all, but I was going through something recently. Oh, there was another one I found it, so there's a lot of them. Yeah, I know I should write a paper on it and systematically look at all the data.
David, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate your talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And just to say, you guys are real pioneers. If anyone needs that to have meditation in their schedule, TM in their schedule, it's medical students. And it's crazy that medical education is so stressful to people. I had a friend of mine who went through, and he was a psychiatrist. He did a study and found that as people went through medical school, he gave them the MMPI psychological test. He found they became more and more paranoid, and they made more and more mistakes. He had a standardized EKG sort of a test where they were presented with things, and you could measure how if they detected things, if they made mistakes. They made more mistakes. These were situations where they had to stay up all night, and which is crazy. But anyway, and so the whole system needs to be changed, unfortunately, and changed to make it easy and convenient for everybody to get the proper amount of rest. And if you're clear and so forth, then you're going to get the proper amount of rest and still learn all that stuff that you have to learn. So, but you're the pioneers. So thank you for, choosing to be in this TM program. And I really wish you well and wish that you get a chance to meditate regularly. So, and together really helps. Encourage each other, but it's more powerful when it's together.
Thank
So
you again, David.
Okay, bye.